So as we study the nervous system from yesterday, this was on your worksheet. Autonomic and somatic nervous system. This is kind of like when we talked about the digestive system, how some parts, or the muscular system rather, some parts are under conscious control and some parts are not. So in what we do, I don't use these words very much, but it was in what you read. So real briefly, and this is pretty obvious, right? The autonomic nervous system is automatic. The somatic, which means body, is under conscious control. And in a minute, when we talk about the regions of the brain, you can kind of see how that maps in. What things might be in the autonomic nervous system? What functions? What things are automatic? You don't think about them, they just happen. Okay, good. Heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, and a lot of this is smooth muscle. You can hold your breath, right, until you pass out, and then you'll start breathing again. So some skeletal muscle things are under conscious control, but yeah, and blinking. So then under conscious control is going to be skeletal muscle functions and things that you have to think about. Okay, so just so when you see those words, you know. Let me skip ahead real quick and see what else I wrote down. Oops, that. So involuntary, smooth muscle, yeah. So same stuff we just said. Okay, so now let's talk about the brain. That wasn't it, was it? There we go. Okay, so let's take a look at the parts of a brain. Again, the textbook actually talks about it, but the worksheet, very disappointingly, just kind of goes over it but doesn't go into detail. So this is really interesting stuff. It will be on the test and the quiz, but I go over it because I think it's really cool. And the textbook should go into more detail because it's just cool. Okay, so the three parts of the brain are the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. So you should draw the brain. It's not that hard. So you can draw a nice brain like this. And this part we're drawing here that we think of as the brain is the cerebrum. The cerebrum is the part of the brain that makes us very human. It's the part of our brain that is very different and it's bigger in proportion than other animals. And we'll come back and put functions there in a minute. Then the cerebellum, I don't know, cerebellum make you think of ball or something. It looks like a tennis ball. It's right down here at the base of the brain. We'll talk about that in a minute. And continuing with my beautiful color coding, the brainstem, which goes like this. So the brainstem, and the brainstem connects down to what? What's this connected to? The spinal cord. Oh, and just in case you're confused, which side is the front? Yeah, this side. Your eyeballs, this is really creepy this way. Your eyeballs are here, and then your optic nerve goes like right along here. So there's your eyeballs. Okay, this is the front of your brain. This is the back. It's a side view. Yeah, creepy. Okay, so let's talk about what each one of these parts does. The brainstem is also known as the medulla or the medulla oblongata, if you want to sound all fancy. Yep, and of course it connects to the spinal cord, but it turns out the brainstem has some really important functions as well. Does anyone know what the brainstem does? Yeah, it's what I call life support. It's all involuntary, but it's things like breathing, heart rate, smooth muscle, digestion, organs, all of that stuff. your life support functions. So breathing, heart rate, smooth muscle like digestion, all of that stuff. So this is the part of your brain that is keeping you alive. It's deep in your brain, and if we look at our brain model here, which I'll pass around, use our brain model. And yes, this is approximately regular sized brain. The part you're looking at, the big pink noodly part, is the cerebrum. And then 2 halves of the brain. You can see the brainstem in white coming out of the bottom like that. And then the cerebellum is this kind of wrinkly tennis ball looking part. This other half of the brain all comes apart so you can see the different parts and pieces. So you can pass that around. Okay, pass it around, check it out as we talk about the brain. So the brainstem does these life support functions. Then the cerebellum, as Tim and Moby mentioned, the cerebellum does things like coordination, balance, and what you call gross motor control. So those are like really big movements of the big muscle groups, like the quads. If you've ever watched a little kid learning to walk and they take those kind of big awkward steps and then they fall down, those are your gross motor skills. The fine motor skills are all the little finer muscle movements that keep you more balanced, or that keep you more so you can run and walk on stairs and stuff like that. Okay, cerebellum. Then the cerebrum. So the cerebrum is the part of the brain that does all of these higher level functioning. So the cerebrum does thinking and memory. And we know, actually, even more detailed, and the textbook on page 635 has some of these things in here. We actually know from studying people with brain injuries where in the brain these things are stored. Now, you can't tell by looking, right? If you look at somebody's brain, it looks like that. You can't tell what the different parts are doing. But people with brain injuries, you know what part of their brain is injured because of looking at MRIs or CAT scans or whatever. And then you know what functions they don't have anymore. So we've learned a lot about it through that. And kind of unfortunately, that's how we learn about the brain. We know that this part right here, the frontal lobe that you need to protect with your bicycle helmet, controls personality and decision making. So that right there is your personality. That's you right here in the frontal lobe of your brain. Here, kind of around your ear, it's called the temporal lobe, and this controls things like language, and hearing is here. In the back portion of your brain is actually vision, back portion of your cerebrum, vision. Who's got page 635 open? What else am I forgetting here? So thinking, memory, and I'm just going to put in here, overall, things controlled in the cerebrum include logic, math, fine motor control, like being able to play a musical instrument, being able to do sports, not just the standing up, moving around, but the really fine tune, you know, pitching a baseball, hitting the baseball right where you need it to go. Let's see, fine motor control. What else do we have? What's that? Yes. Yes, all that fine motor, processing all that information that's coming in, right? And responding to it. Hand-eye coordination. What else? Mm-hmm. But so the question is, if you were to damage your frontal lobe, does that mean it might change your personality? And the answer is yes. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important to protect your head with a helmet when you do things like ride a bicycle. Because if you damage that, severe injuries might make it so you're not quite the same person. Um, People who are in bad car accidents or motorcycle accidents or whatever sometimes have damage like that, and as they recover, they're not really the same person. There's another amazing example, and this is from back in the 1800s. It's a man named Phineas Gage. Anyone ever heard of Phineas Gage? So this is in the 1800s. He was working on the railroad, and the way they blew up the rocks to make way for the railroad is they drill holes in them, and then they'd put gunpowder in it and tamp it down, and with packing and all that, and then they'd set it off with a fuse. Well, he was in the process of helping this. He was actually the foreman. He was in charge of this group of people, and something happened, and as he was tamping this big, 6-foot rod to tamp the stuff down, it sparked. And what happened was, and this is actually a picture. This picture was discovered just in 2009, like in somebody's attic. And they know it's Phineas Gage because not only does the picture say Phineas Gage, but in this black and white image, which is really detailed on his tamping rod here, you can actually see it's etched. And I don't remember exactly what the etching says, but it's let's see if it has it there. But it actually says that Phineas Gage and something about this. So let's go back a second. So what happened was he had this horrible accident, and it knocked him down. The tamping rod went through his head, and you can kind of see he lost an eye here. But what happened later, after he died, scientists, he lived for 10 more years. So they pick him up after the accident. He was a little bit disorientated, and then he started talking. And he certainly had trauma and had a recovery, a rough recovery, but he lived for a while. But you know what? His personality was different. Before that, he was the foreman of the crew. He was in charge. He was a good, hardworking person. And afterwards, he was prone to fits of anger, and he cussed, and he couldn't hold a job, and he couldn't concentrate. And so all of this led people to the original studies of what parts of the brain do different things. And so I will post the link to this on Edmodo so you can look at it in more detail. Oops. But going back to this, so what he damaged was this front part of the brain. So the movement, the life support, that was all okay. And certainly his life was never the same, but he did live. So when you look at different brain damage from strokes or head injuries or accidents or whatever, that's one of the ways we study the brain. So I think that's everything for this. So oops, it's my other brain picture. Make sure we got everything. I think we got everything. Okay, so know the parts of the brain and what they do, because you will see that again.